lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Sir? We'll have open a public hearing on Senate Bill 305, and I recognize the prime sponsor, the esteemed Senator Kevin Abbott.
Oh, esteemed, yikes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and for the committee members. For the record, I'm Senator Kevin Avard, District 12, and I am the prime sponsor of SB 305FN, relative to allowing wholesalers of cigarettes to retain tax revenues collected for each package of cigarettes with the tax stamp sold. SB 305 would restore a tax stamp discount allowance to wholesalers of cigarettes in New Hampshire. Until 2003, wholesalers were compensated by the state for the cost of affixing tax stamps to cigarette packages. 48 other states provide a discount to wholesalers to compensate them for collecting the cigarette and tobacco taxes. This bill would provide for 1 cent per package discount on the purchase price of tax stamps as compensation for wholesalers. One wholesaler, McLean Company in Kentucky, employs about 340 people at their facility. Their annual out-of-pocket cost to affix tax stamps is $140,000, and under this bill, they would receive about $111,000 as compensation to offset the cost. And as far as the technicalities, I got some really smart people behind me. If you don't mind. I do, and there's but. Yes.
I don't know if you read the monthly revenue focus, but were you aware that our tobacco tax revenues are $13 million below plan?
I did not know that.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thanks, Senator.
Thank you, Senator.
Thanks, Senator. Lauren, you guys want? Sorry, I'm off my game today.
Good morning. My name is Lauren O'Sullivan. I'm Senior Financial Analyst at the Department of Revenue Administration.
Wendy Bativier, Financial Analyst, Department of Revenue.
We do not have an opinion on this bill. We are just here to present just a couple of mechanical or technical defects that we saw in the bill, and also to answer any questions. So the one thing that we had noticed in the bill is that it does not provide guidance on how the DRA would administer the 1 cent retention of the tax revenue. And that's because under current law, the way this tax is designed is that it is a prepaid stamp by the wholesaler, and then they're able to attain, and then they put it on the product, but then they're able to obtain a refund if there's problems with the stamp, if it's unsold product, and we can show the destruction of the stamps. So we don't actually know what has actually been affixed on the packages until they file the quarterly resident wholesaler cigarette tax report and the non-resident wholesaler cigarette tax report. So I guess really the issue is at what point is the 1 cent collected or withheld. So we do suggest that we have additional legislative guidance on the intent on how that should work.
That's it?
That's it?
Good. Let me start with one real quick. So my question is that relative to that topic you just talked about, guidance, how do we manage that with rooms and meals tax?
So right now with the meals and rooms tax, when they, oh, I got a twofer. The way that works, if you file electronically, if you remit more than $25,000 a month, or you file timely, you are allowed to hold 3% back on the commission. So there are conditions that have to be met in order to be eligible for that. So not everyone gets that 3%.
And one follow-up question, is that process in administrative rules or is that process in law?
I would have to get back and check on that.
So would it make sense to put some boundaries around this one as we do with rooms and meals? That is a 25,000 monthly revenue. Is there some break point that might make sense? Or do we know?
So I don't have an answer to that, what makes sense. You know, we will administer however, whatever we determine, but that's something we can work on together and figure out how that would work and what constraints need to be made
How
if necessary.
if I could follow up, how do you may not know the answer to this and something I'll have to look up, but how do we determine 25,000 for rooms and meals, and does that change because hotel rates and meal costs have gone up substantially in the last 5 years, or does it hold there forever?
So I'll have to get back to you on that. I have not seen it change. I've only been in the position for a year and a half. I have not seen that evaluated or changed, so I don't know exactly if that, what the history is of that amount.
Okay, thank you.
So my basic, again, mechanical question is, so right now, the the wholesalers buy basically 100,000 tax stamps. If they only use 99,900 of them, because 100 of them failed, because they pre-purchased the 100, they put in for a credit for the 100 that were bad, so to speak. And we give them a credit, but they didn't use them anyway. So it's just and that's the way the current process works.
Correct.
But they're pre-purchased in advance.
Correct.
And the
then it's
tax
kept-
stamp, from what I understand, is $1.78 per pack of cigarettes.
Yes.
And the request, so we tax a pack of cigarettes at $1.78, and they're asking basically for 1 cent out of that $1.78 to help them offset costs. And we do a similar process with rooms and meals, where we allow retailers who are acting as a tax collector of the state to withhold 3% of the revenue collected again, for acting as the tax agent of the state. Is that my understanding? Is that all correct?
That is correct. They are administered a little bit different because the cigarette tax is prepaid as opposed to point of sale. So that's really where we're just looking for that guidance on how to administer that.
Right. Great. Further questions? Seeing none. Thank you, guys. Next up is Richard. I'm not going to even try your last name. So, Richard, if you wouldn't mind coming up, introduce yourself, give your name, and mic's yours.
My name is Richard Brigasio. Hello, my name is Richard Brigasio. I own East West Distributors right in Seabrook, New Hampshire. I'm a tobacco distributor. And when we started in 2003, there was an allowance for stamping cigarettes. But let me just explain all the costs it takes on our distributor to stamp cigarettes. Back in 2003, a stamping machine was $15,000, and then they keep on going up. We just we're on our fourth machine now, and it was $120,000 to get up to the current standards without technology. Back in the day, there was only one stamp we had to buy, and now there's two stamps, one for MSA product and one for non-MSA product. So we have to carry extra stamps because we have two different products, even though they're both $1.78. Secondly, we used to be able to pick up from the Department of Revenue stamps as we needed them. And just a couple of years ago, they switched it. So we have to order them directly from the stamping company. So now we have to absorb more stamps to make sure there's no issue with being out of them, because if there's a delay with a snowstorm and we don't get our stamps, so we have to carry more stamps as a wholesaler. And secondly, we pay the shipping costs, about $300 a month, and then we imply, and like McLean or someone was saying, it costs a lot of money to, full-time employees just at the stamping machine. And as far as the Department of Revenue is concerned, I have a stamping license for Maine where we get that allowance. I would gladly share how they handle their allowance. And if they look back in their records and see how they did it back in 2003 or 2004, before they stopped giving allowance, I'm sure they can figure, it's doable. We're like the only state that really doesn't give us anything for all this extra work that we have to do for the state. The few that don't have it are so low they don't even have a stamp. Georgia, they don't have a stamp. It's 37 cents a pack. So we're pretty much the only state that does not work with their wholesalers on helping out with the cost of making sure it's all stamped. Any other questions, I guess?
So again, so my understanding is this 1 cent that you're asking for, which is less than 1% of the tax collected, is for the purpose of help offsetting what it costs you to stamp the machine and collect the,
Yes,
tax basically.
And
right?
also we have a service contract for, the yearly for someone to come in and do the machine. It's like $4,000.
And that stamp helps TRA and other officials know which, if someone's bringing in cigarettes illegally, because they're missing the stamp that's not gone through the New Hampshire wholesale.
Right. They have a lot of black market on other items that are not stamped because they're not stamped,
And your goal is, again, just to recoup costs that you're for acting as an agent of the state.
Yeah.
Senator Roosevelt?
Thank you. Could you please tell us again what the two different machines are? And could you speak more directly into the microphone?
Okay. Well, I only have one machine now, but it cost me $120,000. There's two different tax stamps. There's cigarettes that pay into this a thing called the MSA, Master Settlement Agreement, and then there's non-participating cigarettes that came out after the Master Settlement Agreement that don't have to pay into this other fund or the same percentage of the big tobacco companies. And the state at some point decided it was easier to keep track of if they used a second stamp. So there's a green stamp for all the big major tobacco companies, and then all these ones that came out after that Master Settlement Agreement, MSA, they require a different stamp because they don't pay the same amount into this MSA fund that was back in 1990 something.
So do you not distribute the non-MSA?
We do, but we have to still put a $1.78 stamp on them. It's just a different color stamp. But that requires us to carry extra stamps because we carry we carry non-MSA cigarettes and we carry MSA cigarettes. It's a little confusing, I know, but
I'm sorry.
the attorney general at some point decided that for them to keep track of the non-MSA cigarettes, it was easier to put a stamp on it, a different color stamp. And so we report MSA, Department of Revenue, if they want to hop in, they could probably explain it a little better too.
Thank you. I thought I heard you say that you had to carry two different machines.
No, I've had to buy over the 20 years. I'm on my fourth machine. The first machine back in the 2000s, it was $15,000. And then I've replaced it in halfway through with I got a used one that was $80,000 for $20,000. And now I got a brand new one that's more technology and everything else is $120,000. And I have a service contract. So I'm saying that was an expense for me. If the state provided the machine, I wouldn't be asking for a credit. If the state would not, would ship us for free, I would not be asking for the credit,
One more. If I could.
I just want to clarify, because
Yeah.
I think I what the answer. So the question is, because you prepay, again, we'll use round numbers, it's easier. You're going to buy $100,000, 100,000 MSA stamps, and then another 100,000 non-MSA stamps, and
roll
you're
of it-
prepaying those in advance.
Yeah, the roll of stamps it comes in 57,000
Whatever.
for 3,000 cottons. The MSA one, they don't do as many, so but either way, if I bought three rolls, it would be one roll for the regular one. But you have to carry extra, because we used to be able to just send our driver to the Department of Revenue out when they're out making a delivery, pick up rolls.
Right.
But now we don't have that luxury. So now we have to pay for shipping, and we have to have more stamps on hand. So we don't, when the snowstorm comes, we're not, or the shipping gets lost, we have something to make in an extra 2 days.
Could I ask one final follow-up? Thank
Right.
you. So,
So nothing's changed since 2003.
so the machine is expensive.
Correct.
My question is, are you able to depreciate that machine on your taxes?
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any further questions? Seeing none? Thank you, sir. Is there anybody else who wish to testify in Senate Bill 305? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing on Senate Bill 305. 514. What's next? Next up is Senate Bill 514. I'll open a public hearing on Senate Bill 514 and I recognize our great Deputy Chief of Staff in the Senate to introduce the bill.
All set, Tony? Good morning, Chairman Lang, members of the committee. I am Grant Bossy, Deputy Chief of Staff of the New Hampshire Senate, here to introduce Senate Bill 514 on behalf of Senator Pearl, the prime sponsor. New Hampshire imposes a normal yield tax of 10% on the stumpage value of timber at the time it is cut, and these funds go to the municipality. There is an exemption, however, for the first 10,000 board feet for a landowner's own use for construction on the property, or for up to 20 cords of fuel wood per year, or the equivalent of wood chips. This creates a lot of paperwork, up to a 15-day delay, and for many small harvesting operations meant on the landowner's property, for which the towns get very little revenue. There's also some confusion in the law on how to convert the equivalent of 10,000 board feet or 20 cords of wood chips. Senate Bill 514 increases the personal use exemptions by 50%, so from 20 to 30, from 10 to 15. Senator Pearl is also hoping to have you consider an amendment, Amendment 0117S, that would clean up the equivalent language by replacing it with an exemption for 300 tons of whole tree chips. As you can see from the attached fiscal note, this would have a negligible impact on revenues. For instance, for the additional 10 cords of firewood, the tax would only be about $10. The juice simply isn't worth the squeeze of making these taxable events. Senate Bill 514 would reduce time and paperwork for landowners harvesting a small number of trees on their own land, and for local officials who are putting in a lot of work for very little revenue. Senator Pearl thanks you for your consideration and hopefully your support of Senate Bill 514. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Bossy? Seeing none, thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Next up is we have one more speaker. It's Jason Stock. Is Jason here? The floor is yours, Mr. Stock.
Well, good morning. For the record, my name is Jason Stock. I'm the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Timberland Owners Association. And we are here today in support of Senate Bill 514 and the amendment that the prior speaker spoke to. As he had mentioned, in the state of New Hampshire, there's a 10%, timber is considered real property, and there's a 10% tax on, the term is stumpage. That's the tree as it grows on the stump. But also, the law recognizes that there are circumstances, if I cut firewood for my own use, I cut logs to make a chicken coop, get milled out, make a chicken coop. There are exemptions for personal use. There's also exemptions for maple syrup production, and then also small land clearing jobs. Think of a single family home. Someone wants to build a barn or put in a riding arena out behind their barn. These small projects, there are these personal exemptions. It's not uncommon for a timber harvester to be working on, say, the Lang Tree Farm, and the D'Alessandro neighbor comes out and says, "Hey, Mr. Timber Harvester, while you're in the neighborhood, I'm going to put an addition on the back of my barn or my house. Can you come over and clear a few trees for me? And so that when the spring arrives, we can begin construction." And right now, the way the process is you would file an intent to cut and wait. There's an obligatory 15-day waiting period or approval period. And so what happens is on these small projects where I may be on the Lang Tree Farm wrapping things up, Mr. D'Alessandro approaches me about that clearing out behind his barn, say, "Geez, I'd love to, but I can't wait 15 days. I have to keep my crew busy. We can file paperwork and come back, but for me to mobilize my crew and then come back, it's on the tune of about $3,000 for me to move my equipment and so forth." And so what happens is that the cost benefit isn't there. And it ends up, in the case of Mr. D'Alessandro, he would end up, his trees kind of shift from a asset to a liability, and he would end up having to pay me to remove those trees because my cost to go off-site, come back and cut them are such that it just doesn't make sense. As the prior sponsor mentioned, this bill modifies the personal exemption. It also modifies the small land clearing exemption, and it changes some language in that provision that would have required town assessors to convert board footage to tons, cords to tons. It just kind of removes that, which is an additional step that has created some confusion with some assessors that may not be as tuned into the forest products and even know what a board foot is. On an annual basis, there are in 2020, there were 2,328 intent to cuts filed in the state of New Hampshire. 400 of those had zero volume. They may have been filed and the sale didn't happen. And then about 673 had from 1 to 300 tons. We had the smallest was 4 tons cut up in the town of Dummer for a grand total of $11. And then we had 298 tons cut in Temple for $418. So you can see this is kind of the universe. These are the tax volumes we're talking about. I don't want to belabor the point. I just, as you can see, this is a situation where the cost benefit analysis, I have spoken to the New Hampshire Municipal Association. They are neutral on the bill. So I spoke to them. They're neutral on this. They're not opposing it. And I did have conversations with the New Hampshire Department of Revenue, and they too are not taking a position on it. So with that, I'll conclude my testimony. I'll be happy to answer questions. I did provide you a copy of our magazine. If you look at page 26, it gives you an idea of stumpage values. And again, the timber tax is 10% of a stumpage value. So again, what we're talking about is most of these projects are those small, probably less than a half dozen trucks. And these are tiny projects that we're talking about. I'm happy to answer questions if the committee has any.
Senator D'Alessandro?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks so much for coming. What's the status of the industry as we speak today?
Industry's in transition. There's no question. We've lost a lot of low-grade wood markets with the loss of the biomass power plants and some contractions in the pulp and paper world. And as a result, we have lost a lot of logging capacity. The trickle-down effect that has occurred as a result of that is many of the solid wood facilities, sawmills in particular, are seeing, they're struggling to get enough quantity of saw logs to run. A good example is the Milan lumber facility up in Milan. It's the state's only spruce fir mill. I believe they're running 4 days a week now. He'd love to be running 6 to 7. So right now we're in a period of, we've kind of gone through a major contraction. Last night, today's weather is going to help because we've had a very wet year, which has also contributed to some idling of logging capacity. But we are definitely in a period where we've kind of, I hope and feel, and talking to industry folks, kind of hit the bottom of a valley. And we, on a bright side, and I want to leave you with a positive note, we have seen some major investments in the state. There's a brand new, I want to say, it has to be at least $15 to $20 million sawmill going in Grantham to process not only hardwood, but eastern white pine. So we continue to see some private investment, but I will say we're kind of at the bottom of that curve right now, and the hope is that some of the few low-grade wood markets that we have now, that those can hold on, and we can attract a few more to the state. But right now, everyone's kind of scratching to keep their nose above water. Thank you for asking, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Further questions on the committee? I have one. Do you have Senator Pearl's amendment?
Mr. Bossy did. I think that looks familiar.
Yeah, I have an extra one. Question about the amendment, because I think it needs a further amendment. And my question is on line 4. It talks about 30 cords of wood or equivalent in, but they use the word and I think that should be or. If I'm not mistaken, the way I'm reading that, because it would read 30 cords of wood or 30 tons of.
No, the intent was and. These exemptions are additive. So if you, let's say you had a wood stove, you cut wood for your wood stove, you go to build a chicken coop, and you have a buddy with a Wood Miser sawmill, they come and saw it out for your coop. So the expectation is that these would be additive. 300 tons, as I was saying, what we're talking about is $3 in taxes. 300 tons at a dime a ton.
I just want, the way I read it, because it was or the equivalent in, it should have been or 300 tons. And that's why I was asking.
Yeah, no, it was fully intended to be and.
Okay, cool.
Because every job has low-grade wood on it.
Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. 300 tons is a lot of pounds. Is that really still a small job? How many trees is 300 tons
Yeah,
of
so
wood chips?
so 300 tons, if you think of it, it's I would say eight to 10 trucks, chip trucks. They carry roughly 30 to 33 tons apiece. I've spoken to some loggers, and what they'll say, it's about 50 trees. Again, depends on the size of the tree and how tall it is, but I've heard anywhere from 50 trees per load. Again, in the world of timber harvesting and these small land clearing jobs, this is still a small. I hear your concern, and for a layperson, these numbers look like a lot, in our world, this is not a lot of volume. Senator?
It's 600,000 pounds. That just doesn't feel small to me versus,
Well, a single tree can weigh thousands of pounds.
I have a giant maple in my yard that's all cut up. I need taken down. I need hauled away. It's too heavy. My tractor won't move it.
so it's
one tree.
50 trucks, is that
No, not 50 trucks.
50 trees?
About, again, depending on the tree, one contractor I spoke to said, he said, figure 45 to 50 trees per truck. We're talking, 30 to 33 tons per truck, 8 to 10 truckloads is kind of put it in kind of a ballpark.
Senator D'Alessandro?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just is that one concern I have is the clear cut. And the disruption of the land and the surface. I've taken many, in the old days, Ray Burton and I used to fly around the state and look at the clear cuts. And they're devastating. Now, are we exercising, more thought in terms of how we handle our forests and how we take the wood out?
Absolutely. Great question. And I have to be careful. I love to talk about trees and forests. These particular projects are small land clearing projects. And there are a host of other permits that would apply to this, such as alteration of terrain through DES and some other permits. If you were to, if you start approaching that, their size limits. Statewide, forestry-wide, we still have a very robust core of consulting foresters. The last I checked, looking at, say, current use records, I'd say about 60% of all the land enrolled in current use was in what's called documented stewardship, which means it has a management plan. There's a forester hired to kind of maintain the forest. So to answer your question, there are a lot of the land is, I would say the majority of the land in the state is under some type of management. The other point I'll raise is that silviculturally, clear cuts, when you speak to the scientist, when a clear cut is done properly, it is the preferred method to regenerate northern hardwoods, yellow birch, sugar maple, and even white birch. So, but if it, like any other tool in a toolbox, if it's not used properly or placed or done correctly, it can be problematic, just the same as going in and high grading. Although you leave trees behind, if you leave malformed and diseased trees behind, in fact, that's even worse than a clear cut because that's your next crop.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So again, I'm not, because you're talking, part of this about the northern country and the giant land tracts. We're not talking about that, right? So this is talking about the smaller provisions for homeowners and reducing the tax revenue is de minimis. But the workload on towns and cities who have to take these intent to harvest permits and all the follow-up of that outweighs the value that we're getting. And the idea is just to expand it to a more reasonable level to reduce the workload on both DRA, local towns, because the tax revenue's not there anyway.
Good summation, yes.
Thanks. Okay. Any further questions? Yep.
Is DRA available for a question?
They're here. I don't know if they know the knowledge on this particular topic. They didn't sign up to speak, but I'm sure we can ask them to come up and
Thank you.
see if they have.
I do have a question.
Sure.
Now,
I will return your.
Oh, you can keep that as an extra. DRA, would you mind stepping up to the table? See if you can answer Senator Rosenwald's question on timber tax.
For the record, my name is Adam Denoncourt. I'm the Assistant Director of the Municipal and Property Division at DRA. So I oversee our timber appraisers, part of my role.
thank you. The amendment increases the amount of wood chips that are exempt by 10 times, does that change the calculation that the fiscal impact would be under 10,000 and be de minimis, or does increasing that by 10 times change the revenue picture we should look at?
Not significantly. I don't think it would change the overall conclusion.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing none, I will close the hearing on Senate Bill 514. Next up, and I'm going to move the gavel over to Lou. 584. Yep.
I'll open the hearing on Senate Bill 584 FN and call upon the prime sponsor of the bill, Senator Lang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee, for taking my testimony. I'm Senator Tim Lang. I represent District 2, which is the Lakes region up north. The bill before you is part of a commission that I served on over the winter. Right now, electric generators are treated as a utility, although they're no longer a regulated utility. And so while we have generators are still lumped in with the utility property tax, which is meant for regulated industries like PSU and PSNH or Eversource, Liberty, those kind of regulated utilities. We changed the law a while back, but we left the generators under the utility property tax, which treats the generators unfairly, in my estimation, and the commission is the same. Because we have a utility property tax, what happens is that generators have to pay the utility property tax, but they're exempt from SWEPT. And because they're exempt from SWEPT, but they're still subject to town tax policy, so your local town tax, the state does an evaluation of the utility, and it bases its valuation for utility property tax on the state version of what it cost, what they think the value of the property is. But then because the town also has a valuation that it needs for its local property tax, the town then goes out and evaluates the business. So the business ends up with two different valuations. And those two different valuations are subject to an incredible amount of lawsuits when the generators try to deal with those. So the intent of this bill is basically get the state out of it. A utility generator is nothing more than a manufacturer. The widget that they happen to create is a kilowatt of energy. They're not a regulated entity any longer. And so my goal is to treat them like every other manufacturer we have in the state of New Hampshire, get them out of the utility property tax, put them into the statewide education property tax instead. Let the towns do the valuation, so the state DRA is now out of that business. It will make it easier on the DRA. It'll reduce the lawsuits because we only have one valuation. Right now, it's not uncommon for the people who are suing to pit the state against the town or the town against the state. And I want to get out of that. It's costing us millions of dollars in lawsuits regularly. And so the goal is, again, to treat these utility generators as regular manufacturers they're not regulated at the PUC, as regular manufacturers. They just happen to create a kilowatt of energy and put them in to treat them like any other manufacturer. So, however, that does cause a deficit in the education trust fund because 100% of the utility property tax goes to the education trust fund. The net loss by this bill, if I had not found a different way of filling the hole, would have been about $10 to $15 million in the education trust fund. So to backfill that hole, because I don't want this to be an anti-education bill, I'm allocating 50% of the communication service tax, which is about $15 million, over to the education trust fund to fill the gap and fill that hole. So the education trust fund is made whole. The general fund is at a loss of $15 million to do this. I guess that's my summation of what it does. I'm happy to take questions and answer. But again, the commission that we served on, I don't remember, Senator D'Alessandro, if you were on it or not, but the commission that we served on with the Honorable Pat Abrami, this was this was the recommendation of the commission, is to move the generators out of the utility property tax so we can break up this lawsuit fight that goes on all the time.
Any questions for Senator Lake, Senator Rosenwald?
Thank you. Thank you for bringing this bill. I sort of have two questions. One, being that since our projection at the end of the biennium is that the Education Trust Fund will have a surplus of $222 million, is it necessary to fill that $7 million hole? My first question.
So, well, I don't think it's necessarily, again, my goal was not to make this turn into some sort of anti-education bill and to keep the Education Trust Fund whole. I will say we also have this $536 million lawsuit we're staring down at, right? And I definitely don't want to make that Education Trust Fund whole, depending on how the outcome of that is. So I don't want to start removing revenue. So again, I was trying to be as fair as I can, and I know what the Education Trust Fund takes, and I do agree it's in the surplus. So yeah, it would not be, if you wanted to strike the communication service tax line and just leave the money as a loss to the Education Trust Fund, I'd support that. But again, I was trying not to make this an anti-education bill.
I understand that. Could I follow up, please?
Sure.
I mean, it would put a $7 million hole in general funds, which we're going to be looking for. So.
Correct. But again, I think it does the citizens and the generators right. I think that's the right thing to do. And it does cost us money, but that's the right thing to do.
I get that first part, but my second question is, given the other education lawsuit that the state is in the middle of unswept, does it make sense to change the swept tax right now?
So it doesn't change the swept tax. It just changes which entities are liable for the swept tax. So that's what the bill does. In most towns, it meant a penny reduction in swept. So it's actually local property taxes would drop by 1 penny by adding this in.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any further questions for Senator Lake? If not, thank you very much for your testimony. We appreciate it. And Lauren and Adam from the DRA. It's a doubleheader. They are speaking, neither for or against, but speaking.
Good morning. My name is Lauren O'Sullivan. I'm the Senior Financial Analyst at the DRA.
And I'm Adam Denoncor. I'm the Assistant Director of the Municipal and Property Division.
Lauren, who's first?
You can start.
Okay, Lauren, you're first.
So
So I was involved in the commission with Senator Lang. And we basically, what we did for the fiscal note was we produce appraisals every year for every piece of utility property statewide. So it's rather easy based on the filings that we receive from the utility property taxpayers to extract those generation assets and develop a value of what those would have been on their own. This bill, as it's written, is something that we could administer. We made one suggestion for language, and that's simply because we want to be sure that we are able to capture everything that is taxable and everything that is not taxable. And some of these entities do own assets that are either generation and transmission or some portion of each. So we want to be sure that we're not having to go comb the state for what's transmission and what's generation, but rather have them report to us what they actually have so that we can properly tax it or not, as the case may be.
Question to the Lake?
Just, do you have language or where that you want that, what that looks like?
I think it's in the fiscal note, isn't it? Or maybe it's in the quick guide. Down at the bottom there.
cool.
Yeah, yeah. So which line is it? Sorry. My apologies.
No, it's good.
Thanks. So section 3, relative to annual filing, we're looking for it to say collect sufficient information identifying utility and non-utility property. So therefore, if a property owner were to only own generation, they would still file with us to indicate that is all that they own. And likewise, if another utility property taxpayer owned both generation and, let's say, transmission assets, they would then file with us to identify those assets that are exempt and those that are not. And that would allow us to make it basically a zero-sum situation where we can have an idea of what's out there, what's taxable, and what's not.
So
Does that answer your question?
a follow-up, yeah. So do you have that in writing or what we can adopt as a committee amendment? Is that somewhere we can see it?
Is this the fiscal note? Yeah.
So yesterday, we did send over fiscal note quick guides, and that proposed language is in that quick guide. It was sent via email.
Okay, I think our fiscal note is still dated 12/6 of 23, so we don't have an updated fiscal note with this.
Right.
Okay, we will send that over again.
Okay.
Do you have a copy of it with you? Sonia, can you have Adam go make copies for us?
Oh, gave the wrong one.
Hold on.
Time.
Apologize.
Okay, while we're waiting, there is an updated fiscal note that will be coming that explains what,
Yeah, I'm gonna go make
right,
copies.
okay, so we'll have that. Are there any further questions for the DRA? First of all, can we clarify one point? There is no such thing as the Education Trust. That's a figment of our imagination. And it is not a trust. And the general fund is responsible for anything having to do with education. If it's up, fine. If the funds that are moved towards education are enough to cover it, we pay it. If there aren't, we go right to the general fund and pay it. Is that correct, or I've been on this case since the nonsense came about the Education Trust in 1998. There is no, if it were a true trust, it would be a true trust. It isn't. Or am I wrong?
Well, if there is a shortage in, so we do set aside revenue as it comes in, and it does get allocated to what we call the Education Trust Fund. But if it is short, the general fund does make up that difference.
And if it's over, at times, they roll the money back to the general fund, do they not?
I'm not aware of that.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's a logical determination, not a physical determination for the trust fund, right? So we logically separate the funds, even though it's one big pool, we allocate, as a line item, this is earmarked for this. So it's a logical separation, not a physical separation. It's not a true separate fund. It's just a logical,
Yeah, and then expenses that are dedicated from that their funding is
come from that
from
logical
480.
separation. Okay, thank you.
Are there any further questions for the DRA? Just, can I follow up on Senator Rosenwald's question? There's currently litigation as it relates to the statewide education property tax. That's a court situation, and how we fund education is also another suit. Is it wise to be making changes in law at a time when we're litigating?
I'm not sure that we would know whether or not it were wise, but it is, as this bill is written, it is possible for us to administer it based on the framework that currently exists.
Okay, I didn't really hear that. Could you put the microphone?
Sorry.
So,
I'm not sure if we have an opinion on whether or not it's wise, but the bill as written is something that we can administer based on the current statutory framework.
Okay, thank you. Further questions? If not, thank you very much for your testimony. Heidi Kroll wishes to speak in favor of the legislation.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Heidi Kroll. I work at Gallagher, Callahan, and Gartrell, and I'm here today on behalf of the Granite State Hydropower Association. So the Granite State Hydropower Association was a member and a participant of the study commission that Senator Lang mentioned in his opening remarks. We participated actively in that, a GSHA representative. We are here in support today of SB 584. And I think the prime sponsor did a nice job of summarizing the purpose of the bill, the intent of the bill. GSHA members, are aware of the controversy that can sometimes arise between the state and the municipalities with very different valuations of utility generation property. Granite State Hydropower Association members are typically 5 megawatts or less. They're small generators located throughout the state, run-of-river hydro. And sometimes, we get variations. So we do think that this piece of legislation will help in terms of avoiding future litigation. We did work with Senator Lang on some language, which we are supportive of, that's on page 1 of the bill, lines 3 through 15. So this piece of the legislation addresses small renewable generators are allowed under current law to enter into voluntary payment in lieu of tax agreements with municipalities. It's a win-win situation for the municipalities. Municipalities like it because they know they have some stability in the tax payments that they're going to get, and it's also advantageous for small renewable generators. So we've worked out some language here, which basically kind of allows up to a 5-year transition period for any existing small renewable generators that have pilots work into paying the local education property tax. So with that, I will be short and brief. I know you have other people behind me who would like to speak. Happy to answer any questions. And,
Are there any questions for Heidi? If not, thank you very much for
Thank you.
for your testimony. Appreciate it. Catherine Heck is opposed to the bill, but does not wish to speak. Is she here? She registers in opposition. Dan Dolan and Molly Connors are wishing to speak in favor of the legislation.
Good morning, Senators. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm Dan Dolan, President of the New England Power Generators Association. I'm here with my colleague, Molly Connors. I also served on the commission with Senator Lang and appreciate the introduction of this legislation. The New England Power Generators Association represents over 90% of the electric generating capacity across the 6 states of New England. And here in New Hampshire, our members own and operate over 4,000 megawatts of a fuel diverse power generation fleet that also employs over 1,500 people who work in this state. As part of that, our members pay millions of dollars in state and local taxes. And as the senator outlined, we believe that this bill helps level the playing field and recognize the real world dynamics of how power plants operate after 25 years of electric restructuring in which power plants are no longer owned by rate-regulated utilities like Eversource, Liberty, and the others. As part of that, they are akin to any other manufacturer that converts a fuel into a product and therefore we believe should be recognized as such for taxation purposes. This also creates the local control that we have heard so much from the municipalities in terms of making sure for this.
Good morning, Senators.
For this.
Good morning, Senators. As you've heard a little bit about, here in New Hampshire, our power plant members pay two distinct property taxes. At the state level, they're paying the utility property tax, and as you've heard, they're not actually utilities. And at the local level, they're paying this statewide education property tax, the SWEPT. And so this means that our members in regular intervals have to go through two processes. At the state level with DRA, they need to go through the process of going through the fair market value of their property. And at the municipal level, they have to work with the assessor's office or the contractor that the community has hired to go through another process for the fair market value. And as a result of that, unfortunately, that often leads to two abatement processes that involve, consultants and lawyers. And again, all too often, legal appeal processes that, again, involve double the work for them. We think this is obviously a needlessly burdensome system that, again, is exclusive to New Hampshire, where they go through the distinct process of two assessments. And we don't think that this is really something that was intended by the general court. We think that this is something that is a result of electric restructuring. Because, 20, 25 years ago, the power generating facilities were owned by the utilities. They were owned by Eversource. They were owned by Liberty. And as a result, Eversource could just say, well, we have to pay our property taxes and we will recover that cost from our ratepayers. And to this day, Liberty, Unitil, Eversource, when they pay a property tax, they just recover that cost through the rates that everyone pays. Our power plants are not like that. Our power plants do not have a guaranteed cost recovery administered by state regulators. Instead, our power plants are working to compete against one another. And in that competition, they have to recover the costs of their property taxes through markets that are regulated by the federal government. So it's really an apples and oranges in terms of the definitions. We just think that the definitions really need to be updated. It's not really a policy change from our point of view. It's rather just bringing one part of the law into alignment with another.
Thank you. Any questions for?
Just a quick one, if I
Okay,
could.
Senator Ennis, go
Just a quick question to be sure I have this right, and I think I do. So if we had a big fuel distillation plant in New Hampshire that's making fuel, gasoline, kerosene, et cetera, they'd be taxed as an industry, not as a power producer, in spite of the fact they're producing essentially power, right? Fuel for power. Same thing you're doing.
Right. We really do think of our members as manufacturers. They're
Yeah.
taking a product and turning it into a commodity.
Something somebody else can use. Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Just this one. Your plants, how many of them are online and producing power and driving it into the grid? Or how many of them are the specialty when we have a peak demand plants?
Interesting.
So the vast majority of what we call the generation capacity
Yes.
are the facilities that are online and providing more day-to-day power. There is probably somewhere in the order of 10 to 15, some years 20% of that capacity that is then held back in reserve.
Yes.
Can I ask Heidi a question?
Of course.
Heidi, would you mind coming back there? So I don't know if these.
Turn on your microphone.
I don't know if you heard DRA speaking, but on the bill on line 24, DRA is asking for a clean change to make it easier for them to identify generating versus non-generating. And so what they're asking for is on line 24, it says, collect sufficient information identifying and striking so that the department can. Are you okay with that language?
Yes, we are.
Thank
Thank you.
So line 24 on page 1 of the bill, there's what DRA per their fiscal note asked that it's that whole sentence read, collect sufficient information and strike so that the department can, and just say collect sufficient information identifying utility and non-utility properties. That was the request of DRA.
Right. Right.
And I just wanted to make sure, because I had negotiated a lot of this language with a lot of different people, that they were okay with it.
All right, if there's no one else who wishes to testify for or against Senate Bill 584, we'll close the hearing. Thank you very much for attending.
So, next one's mine too.
You can probably get over in a couple minutes or getting. Yeah.
I'll introduce this one and then.
We'll open the hearing on Senate Bill 585 relative to a property lien resulting from unpaid meals and rooms taxes. Call upon the prime sponsor, Senator Lang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Tim Lang, District 2, covering the Lakes region. So this bill came forward because unlike corporations, in an LLC where you have members that are passive investors in an LLC, specifically around the hospitality industry, rooms and meals tax, DRA, when an entity doesn't pay their rooms and meals tax, puts a lien on the personal property of all investors in the LLC, even if you're a passive investor and have nothing to do with the operations. You had an extra $100,000 you wanted to invest in something, and so you put $100,000 into a bar, only to find out the managing partners didn't pay the property tax and your personal home now has a lien on it. But you have nothing to do with the management of the LLC or the management of the bar itself. So what this looks to do is just strike those passive investors out, and only the active LLC members who are engaged in they're the president, the managing partner of the LLC, or maybe they're the chef, right? And they're involved in the operations of the LLC in the entity being invested in. Only those are subject to the lien. That's the simple version of the bill. It just tries to keep it so those passive investors aren't getting their private property attached for an investment that they have nothing to do with. We don't do that with corporations. You can be a stockholder in a full-blown corporation and you would not get your private property attached as a stockholder. But only in LLCs we decide we want to do this. So, and I get it, if you're managing it, you should be responsible for it. But if you're just invested in it, you shouldn't be responsible for it. That's it. It's the whole bill.
Thank you. Any questions, Senator Rosenwald?
Thank you. Thank you for bringing us this bill. Do we exempt passive investors of other kinds of LLCs? Or would this be something different with the rooms and meals tax?
I honestly don't know the answer to that question. My understanding it's different, but I wouldn't swear in a Bible of that. But my understanding is it's different. How we deal with PPT and BET is different than how we deal with rooms and meals tax, but I could be wrong.
Maybe we can ask the DRA.
DRA is coming up next, Senator.
Okay.
Okay, you can address them.
I will say in my conversation with DRA, they're slightly opposed to this because they say it's incredibly how fast the rooms and meals tax gets paid when they put a property lien on someone's property. But for what that's worth.
Senator, you have a question?
Yeah, quick question. I think it's just framing the issue for me. I'm a passive investor in 3 restaurants out of state. And as I'm thinking about this, the company owns 51% of each restaurant, and the investors have the other half, essentially. So if it were a similar situation in New Hampshire, the lien would go against the 51% owners, right? And I'm seeing a head shake.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's true. Again, in an LLC, you have members, right?
Where would the lien go then?
So again, my understanding is the lien goes against all the members of the
No, I
LLC,
understand
right?
that,
Including
but
the passive investor who's not involved in the LLC management.
Right, but in your bill, it would go against management.
Would go against the managing partner, the managing member, because you're in an LLC, you identify a managing member, so it go against the managing member.
So that's
And
actually what I was
if
trying.
you're a member of, if you're the, I don't know what word to use, maitre d', the bartender, the
Right.
chief cook, and you're also an investor and you're also involved in the operations.
Right.
It would also go against you because you're involved in the operations of the facility and you're responsible for the operations of that facility. But it wouldn't go against, again, a passive investor who just wanted to invest and open a bar and put money in. And it's just, so.
Okay.
Further question?
No.
You're all set? Thank you. Any other questions for Senator Lang? If not, thank you very much for your testimony.
to stick around, but I need to run over to HHS and introduce a bill.
Okay. Warren from the DRA.
Good morning. I'm Lauren O'Sullivan, Senior Financial Analyst at the Department of Revenue Administration.
Good morning, Senators. My name is Keen Meng Wong, Tax Policy Counsel with the DRA. Relating to SB 585, the department does not have a position on this bill. However, we just want to highlight the potential challenges that this bill could impose on the department in terms of collecting unremitted M&R taxes. So currently, as it was discussed earlier, when the M&R taxes is not remitted to the DRA, so the M&R tax essentially is a trustee's tax. It's paid by the customers of the restaurants, and then the restaurant operators collect that and remit that to the DRA, to the state, essentially. So when the operators fail to remit that money over to the DRA, essentially the operators are keeping the state's money. And when the operators fail to remit the money over, we go through the process of collecting the money from the operators. And when they fail to do that, a lien is attached to the members of the, in this case where the relevant to the bill is the LLC members. All members listed on the LLC will be the lien will be attached to all members, be it whether they are in managerial capacity or not managerial capacity. This bill seeks to remove the operators, the managers or the owners who are not with the managerial capacity from the lien process. In that sense, we think that this could be a challenge to us because the DRA does not really have all that information when we're attaching the lien as to which member has a managerial capacity versus which member is just a silent investor, and therefore the DRA just sends out the lien attachment to all members. So with this bill, potentially the DRA might have difficulty in finding that information, or even to effectuate a timely lien, and just want that to be considered by the committee.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for the DRA? Senator Rosenwald?
Thank you.
Senator Murphy?
Just want to re-ask my question. Do we shield passive investors in other kinds of LLCs, or would this be a unique situation?
Currently, all members that are listed on when the operator applies for an M&R license, they fill out a form and they list out all the members within the LLC, and then the DRA double checks that information with the Secretary of State information that is submitted by the business, whether they are passive investors or not. But as long as they're listed in there and we match the information, then we would approve the M&R licensing.
For other taxes,
Oh, for other taxes.
right. Do we shield passive investors for other liabilities, or would this M&R be the only situation where we would be exempting passive investors?
This bill is specifically only to M&R taxes.
But if I might, are other taxes treated in the same fashion? Are the passive investors, do they have liability?
Yeah, I don't believe so, but I just have to double check. I don't believe so.
I think that's very important. Yes.
Okay.
And I think it's very important that we get that answer, have real effect on this bill. Okay. Senator, do you have a further question? You're okay? Okay. Senator Murphy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have several questions, if I may. How many other taxes do we have that result in potentially a lien on a property?
Yeah, and I was thinking about that too, as I was trying to answer Senator Rosenwald's question. And I'm not sure how often that happens in terms of other types of taxes where there's a default in tax and then a lien is placed on the either the shareholders or the assets. From my discussion with our collections division, the majority of the collection actions are against M&R operators who are the bulk of the default. I guess they're not taxpayers there, but people who are supposed to remit taxes to the DRA. Yeah.
Thank you.
Further question?
Yes, sir. 11 years ago, there was a month, I own 2 restaurants myself. 11 years ago, there was a month where I just had a lot of stuff going on and forgot to pay. And so on the 16th of the month, I rushed in to my computer, realized I'd made this terrible mistake, and I paid my $8,000 obligation. And I got socked with, I think, $3,000 of interest and late payment fees. It was frankly, the percentages were punitive. Now, I was able to basically appeal and go through the process and say, look, I've been in business 10 years and this is the first time and it's a day late. And they cut me some slack. I still got fined. But a significant portion was abated anyway. My question is, when you assign a lien on someone's property, is it only on the outstanding tax balance, or would a lien ever be assigned or reapplied for someone that maybe was behind in paying the interest or the penalties, which in some cases can be 30% of the balance? Are those interest and penalties then added to the tax balance? Or if somebody owed $10,000 in taxes and $4,000 in fees, if they pay the $10,000, is there no chance of a lien? That's my question.
That's a very good question. I don't have that answer for you right now, Senator. I'll have to double check. My suspicion is that as and when the lien is attached, it will be based on the tax amount that's owing plus any other amounts that's still owing that's calculated to date. I suspect that's the case, but I need to just confirm that.
I think this is an important question, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay. If not, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Is there an answer for the senator? Are you looking at something?
I will research that and send a reply back to the senator. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Speaking in favor of the legislation, Henry Vayu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, for the record, my name is Henry Vayu, and I'm here on behalf of the Lodging and Restaurant Association. Thanks, Senator Lane, for putting the bill in, and he did a good job of explaining the issue. It's simply that equity owners of corporations, shareholders, are not liable for or are not subject to a lien on the meals and unpaid taxes, but silent owners, members of an LLC are. That's basically what the issue is. And I was speaking with attorney Peter Beach yesterday at the Sheehan Law Firm. He's done a number of cases and a few on this issue, and wrote me a short memo and mentioned a few things. And he says, in general, most people starting a new business, if they know anything about LLCs, are aware of the general rule that a member of an LLC is not subject to the liabilities of the LLC, just as a shareholder is not subject to the liabilities of a corporation. However, when where liability for the meals and rooms tax is involved, shareholders of a corporation are not treated as operators, and unless they're acting in a managerial capacity for the corporation, but members of an LLC are treated as operators simply because they are members, regardless of whether they are operating in a managerial capacity or not. He put together one quick instance. You've got young John. He's been working in a restaurant, wants to start his own restaurant. So he establishes an LLC to operate the new restaurant. He's a member of the LLC. John's parents contribute money to the LLC. They are members of the LLC. The LLC has only one class of membership interest and does not have a managing member. By default, the LLC is managed by its members, in this case. John's parents know nothing about the restaurant business, and despite their powers under the statute, they are not involved in any way of the management of the restaurant. John manages the day-to-day activities. John's parents are silent members. John fails to pay the rooms and meals tax. DRA, seeking to collect the tax, applies a lien to John's property. But John he's renting, he's leasing the restaurant space, so there's really nothing there. And John's parents have bank accounts, which can be, the department can go after that. So just trying to address that different treatment. And to answer a question you raised, Senator Ennis, Attorney Beach mentioned the statute can be and has been interpreted by the DRA to make any one member liable for the entire tax liability, regardless of that member's percentage interest in the LLC and regardless of their status as being a silent involved member. So in your instance, if there's one person that, so that's to answer your question. So that's it.
So I'm thinking this through. So imagine if you had 401k, it's invested in Pfizer. Pfizer gets sued, can't pay, and they put a lien on your house. I mean, that's effectively what we're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Senator Rosenwald has a question.
I guess I'm curious why, if I had a restaurant or I wanted to open one and I didn't have my parents invest, but I found outside investors who thought that it was good business proposition. Why, if I didn't pay my rooms and meals tax, wouldn't I find the idea that they could be on the hook also? Why wouldn't I find that appealing? I guess I don't understand. But I can kind of get why you maybe wouldn't want your parents to have to pay your tax bill. But in other cases, could you help me understand, please, why that restaurant owner wouldn't want the liability spread around?
Well, maybe to answer it a different way, if someone is going to start a restaurant and hires an attorney to get advice on everything they should know about it, and if the council advises them that that everyone could potentially be on the hook, and that person needs to disclose to folks that are potentially thinking of helping. An investment in a restaurant, I mean, the margins are so small, especially for a small business, that those are going to be the ones that are starting the LLCs. The corporations are fine, for a small business, a lot of times the investors are trying to help someone get started and maybe, get some return on it. But I think it would stunt the ability for that individual to find people to invest in it, if he's got to disclose to them that even though you don't know what I'm doing here day to day, you could be on the hook for the unpaid rooms and meals taxes. Which might make it more difficult for them to find someone to invest and get them started in the business if they've got to disclose to them that just because you're a member of this corporate, whether you're a silent investor or not, if this goes south, your assets could be on the hook. And that's the challenge, I think, that the small business operator starting out faces. That's what we're trying to correct. And make it on par with a larger corporation. That's all.
Any further questions for the witness? If not, thank you very much for your testimony. No one else is there anyone else in the room who wishes to testify for or against Senate Bill 585? If not, we'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 585.
Oh, no, so yours, Mr. Chair. I have the amendment next. I know you keep trying to give me that gavel back. So we have the public hearing on the non-committee amendment.
Are you going to introduce the amendment?
So, Mr. Chair, in front of the committee is an amendment to Senate Bill 432. This is the ever anticipated amendment to the advanced deposit wagering bill. What this bill does is, in essence, adds a requirement for gaming operators to have at least 10 days a year of gaming operations that they would attribute to the local municipality that hosts them. Again, the idea behind this is a tax savings bill that the gaming operators consume some municipal services, and while they do pay property taxes and all those other things, the idea is to give them, for the police that show up and the parking problems and any other kind of instance, is to allow the municipality revenue to offset some of those costs relative to having that type of business within their community. It's that straightforward. Again, my goal is a tax reduction bill for local communities who have to pay property taxes, is to reduce their property taxes by allowing these gaming operators to host at least 10 days a year. And the proceeds of that will be distributed at the same rate we do for charities. 35% of the proceeds of the net revenue, gaming revenue, would go to the municipality, the hosting municipality. And I did this as a replace all to make it clean so you can see the entire bill. So instead of pages with different things in it. If you remember on the first part of the bill, the original underlying bill, the advanced deposit wager, we passed that bill already in this body. It went over to the House and had a problem over in the House. And so we're reintroducing it to bring it back over to the House.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Comments on the, we have two people who wish to testify. Charles McIntyre is speaking.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Charlie McIntyre, Director of the Lottery. As for the amendment, we're taking a position. We were in favor of the obviously advanced deposit wagering bill, but how you folks spend money gets spent is not really what we do. We raise it. And so certainly, but I would suggest to you heartily that of the communities I've been to regarding charitable gambling, it is their number one question, essentially, that they're absorbing this function without being compensated for it. So I would pass along the number of communities that we've been to and will continue to be to, that it is a very deep concern of theirs. And we're here to answer any questions that you have regarding this.
Any questions for Mr. McIntyre? Senator?
Thank you. Nashua has 3 casinos.
Yes.
And a few years ago, when we had a bill to expand the hours of operation to 4 a.m., I had a conversation with the chief of police. And he said, we've never had increased law enforcement needs for any of those operations. So how have you quantified that there is a cost to other communities? Because apparently there hasn't been one to Nashua.
So by and large, thank you for the question, Senator. By and large, the communities have absorbed those. And I know it's kind of odd, but oddly, criminal activity is usually the least of these social issues. Sometimes they come in playing too much. Sometimes they come in terms of traffic engineering. We've left that to the communities. I'm an expert in gambling. I'm not an expert in sort of the communities. And I will only submit the one request we get most often in terms of revenue to the city or town. But thank you for the question. I can't answer it more than that.
Is further question, Senator? Are you okay? Okay. Any further questions for, sure, go ahead.
So Nashua has 3 places.
Yes.
Does that mean the city would get 30 nights?
It would get 10 nights per facility. If all 3 stayed open, that's correct. It would be significant revenue to Nashua.
And if the fourth that's talked about opens up, there would be 40 nights.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Senator Murphy?
Thank you. I just had a question occur to me. Mr. McIntyre, is there any concern or possibility of displacing charities for those 10 nights a year per facility?
Certainly, it's a consideration, Senator, to your point. Some of the facilities have difficulty filling their charitable nights. Some have waiting lists. It depends on the facility and the expected revenue by facility. Some, there's a large revenue to the charity, and some they're very small. So, but it is a concern, Senator, certainly.
Further questions? You okay? Any further questions for Mr. McIntyre? If not, thank you so much for your testimony. Elisa, from the New Hampshire Center for Nonprofits.
Thank you, Senator D'Alessandro, and thank you, Chairman Lang, for providing plenty of notice that you were going to introduce the amendment. I'm here representing the New Hampshire Center for Nonprofits. We're the statewide association for the charitable sector. I'm passing out the hard copy from CEO Kathleen Reardon expressing our opposition to this amendment, and we're addressing not the advanced wagering portion, but specifically the end that would actually take revenue that is dedicated for the charitable sector and move it to covering municipal costs. Just some context here. The Center for Nonprofits has not really actively engaged on charitable gaming earlier. You'll see us when we're talking about property tax exemptions and incentives, for raising revenue for charities, and certainly a lot around pandemic relief and keeping our charities going. But we did some regional advocacy meetings recently, and we started to hear more and more from our stakeholders. We had found that nonprofits that were providing essential services, so homeless shelters, domestic violence organizations, key healthcare organizations were integrating this revenue into mission delivery, and we're really fearing some of the proposed changes that were coming, that were being proposed. And so also we were hearing concerns around other issues not addressed in this bill around some rents that were being charged, and also a lack of transparency around the selection process. As we just heard from Mr. McIntyre, there is a wait list at the larger gaming operators. And as the former chair of an arts nonprofit on the Seacoast, I can tell you we waited 2 years to access the opportunity, and the revenue is fully integrated into the mission and has been a game changer for the organization. we have to raise our voice in opposition. We don't think the timing of this is appropriate. The legislature passed, and some of you serve on a really important gaming commission that's looking at a lot of the issues around how we have gaming set up in the state. And they are tasked with doing that. In addition, they were provided a budget to hire a consultant, and we know the lottery has already swiftly put out an RFP and is into that process. We think that that question is better discussed in that context, and this feels like a rush to codify a major shift in revenue. And then honestly, we are very worried about a slippery slope here. We understand that in a state like ours, particularly a state where we rely on the charitable sector more than in other places where we rely on government, that we are, pulling a major source of support out from those participating charities. So we ask you to seriously consider pausing this portion of your amendment and taking this up within the commission. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions? Before I get to Senator Rosenwald, what you're saying is the only portion of this amendment that you disagree with is the portion that allots days to the municipalities, but you're very much in favor of the first part of the amendment.
We don't have a position on the advanced wagering piece. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Just wanted to clarify your statement for the record.
Yeah, and so, to Senator Rosenwald's point earlier, 30 nights in one region, and a region where I know that we have a homeless shelter, we have harbor care, we have like major, that could go to 40 nights. And so you're going to find a competition in these places where you have a place attractive to grow the gaming, and you have essential services. So we might not be setting up the best solution here, and so we ask you for time so we can further engage with the commission. That has been working very hard and coming together frequently for lots of these difficult discussions.
So, Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Would it be fair to say that a few communities would benefit from the income, but a statewide services from charities for other communities would be negatively impacted? So we'd benefit a few communities but harm people all over the state that are served by nonprofits?
I think I could endorse the last part. I'm unaware of the municipal, I'm not sure where the origin of the outcry is for covering some of these costs. We did reach out to the Gaming Operators Association. They might be here today, and this is back several months. And we had heard that, examples of municipalities where costs for law enforcement and parking was more acute around restaurant and bar activity, and there was less need in the gaming operators. So we're not sure that this is a direct need. Obviously, revenue for municipalities is always going to be a need. And I do know that gaming operators are paying business profits tax, business enterprise tax, as well as property taxes. And that's, I believe, one, maybe two, and perhaps Mr. McIntyre, will know this, are already providing additional resources to the home communities. But I do know that you are putting essential services charities at risk of high disruption in their revenue models. And if we're going to do that, which we would oppose, but if that's a move that, we collectively, then we need to give them more notice and a process. And so I'm not sure that this is the best solution. And certainly we would like more time to discuss how we're going to make this whole, kind of gaming has become a bit of a Jenga puzzle. I was saying with someone at the New Hampshire Lottery yesterday, and it sounds like we're trying to put the pieces in a way where we have the correct foundation and that it's supporting the right needs for the state. And certainly charities are the ones that are licensed legally, right? They're the ones that hold the license to sponsor gaming, and that is how we're structurally set up. So it feels inappropriate to be shifting the sponsoring entity's revenue to another need for the state.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Senator Lang?
So I guess my question comes around this, is that given the fact that we're increasing revenue in municipalities, which in theory would drive down their need to raise taxes, doesn't every charity, even within that community, benefit from that versus just the ones benefiting from charitable gaming? If the town has more revenue coming in and has the ability to either reduce its growth of tax rates or reduce the tax rate, which benefits everybody within that community, including the charities that operate within that community that may not be part of charitable gaming.
I mean, I can see your argument. I mean, we all live in a town and we all benefit when the town is doing well. But I don't know that there's always a direct relationship between kind of the tax revenue of the community and the mission delivery of the entity. You know, some nonprofits own their property, and so they are benefiting from the statewide tax exemption if they're using it for mission-related purposes. But some of them are renting, some of them are providing services outside of that community. Some communities do provide small grants to their community nonprofits, but they are not that many municipalities in the position to do that, and they're not large grants that really sustain the organization. But I can understand, I mean, we all benefit when our communities are prospering, but it is more of a hit to the charitable sector than a benefit.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Is there anyone who wishes to speak for or against the amendment? If not, we'll close the hearing on the amendment. Here we are.
So we're going to take a 10-minute break. Local bio, we'll be back here in 10 minutes, and I'd like to go into executive session. We can discuss what bills we want to do. So we're back at 11:18.
As I
So we're going to come back into the meeting of the Senate Ways and Means Committee, and I entertain a motion to go into executive session.
So moved.
Been moved by Senator Innes, seconded by Senator D'Alessandro to go into executive session. I'm going to be working from our worksheet and going from the top to the bottom as we start discussing bills. The first bill up is relative to allowing wholesaler cigarettes to retain tax revenue collected on each package of cigarettes or tax stamps sold. Senate Bill 305, and I recognize Senator Innes for a motion.
I move on to pass on Senate Bill 305.
It's been moved on to pass by Senator Innes. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Senator Murphy. Any further discussion about Senate Bill 305? Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. I'm going to oppose this motion. We're already in the hole on the tobacco tax. And I think since we heard that buying these machines is a cost of doing business that they take a tax break on, I just don't think it's something we need to do. Thank you.
I would clarify that the tax break, is a deduction, but it doesn't mean they get the money back, right? So they pay $120,000. They're probably still out 80.
But we protect them in a number of ways. The number is, we have the lowest cigarette prices in the area.
True.
That's number one. And number two, you got to tell me how it costs $140,000 a year to put those stamps on. I can't believe that. I find that number unacceptable. I'm going to vote against it. I think as long as they can use the deduction methodology for the equipment that they buy, that's significant. And we have jacked that up so that they can get rid of that. They can get rid of that much quicker. They can accelerate that depreciation. We've done that here. Say, well, I think they're doing okay. I don't see many people going out of business.
So, all right, so again, I'm only going to make the statement, the only reason they have to buy the machine is because the state tells them to.
Right.
And so they wouldn't even have that expense had it not been that we require that they do this activity for us as a tax agent. And so for me, the ability to offset their minimal, again, we're talking about less than 1%, it's $1.78 per pack. And they're asking for 1 cent out of that $1.78 to help them offset operation expenses that they have that they would not have to occur, except for the fact that we make them act as the tax agent. So I'm in favor of the bill, obviously, but just to clarify the expense, it's a machine they would not even need, except that we require them to do a function. And so giving them the way to recoup some of that cost back, I think is reasonable.
Which we do with rooms and meals.
Which we do with rooms and meals as well. Senator Rosenwald.
Yes, thank you. I mean, they obviously think it's worth being in that business. To me, this seems like corporate welfare, and I just can't.
And I think equating it to rooms and meals, the vendors collect that tax for us and remit that tax to us. And if they do it improperly, they suffer a significant penalty.
Speaking from experience, it's easy.
I think to equate the two is, there's no synergistic relationship between those two items. Okay. Sir, from the business sector.
All right. So any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay?
No.
3-2. Senator Innes, would you mind taking it out?
I'd be happy to.
Next up is Senate Bill 326, relative to the adjudication of lottery infractions. And I'll make a motion of interim study.
Second.
And seconded by Senator D'Alessandro. Just speaking to this, again, if you remember, members, this was a case of, I think this is a bigger conversation than just the Department of Lottery. It's DES, it's agriculture, it's anywhere where you have a department issuing a fine and the same department acting as the adjudicator of that fine within the state. And it's a bigger conversation than just lottery. And I think the interim study report should reflect that. And that's why I'm making the motion interim study.
Okay.
So all those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed, no. 5-0. Motion for consent.
Move consent.
Move consent by Senator Innes, seconded by Senator Rosenwald. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And who wants to take it out? Lou, you want to take it out?
Sure.
If you're ready, I'll move 363 on to pass.
Senate Bill 363 has been moved, ought to pass, and seconded by Senator Rosenwald. I am going to ask for a committee amendment on this. Let me pull the bill up again real quick. And it's strictly around the implementation date, pushing that out a little bit, give the industry understand we're targeting one business. There's only one business in the state of New Hampshire that does this. They do it to the tune of roughly $1 million. They need time to work out the lost revenue and have that a plan for that. So I'm going to ask that on the last line, the effective date be changed to 2028. So that would be my motion. Is there a second?
It's a long time.
Could we do it? We talked about 27, 26.
I could support 27.
All right, let's see. I'll amend my motion to say 27. Gives them 3 years to work out how that revenue will be dealt with.
All right.
So Louis, second, 27?
Yes.
So it's been moved by myself, seconded to amend the bill to change the effective date to 2027. Any further discussion?
I'm going to vote against the amendment, but I will support the bill.
Right. So I will make one clarification. So in follow-up with the operator, the statement was made that we take raising games from Mexico and the cartel.
Yeah.
But that's absolutely not true. We do take games from West Virginia. We take races from Ireland. We take races from the UK. We take races from Australia. We do not take games races from Mexico. So just so people know where that is, that whole argument around we're supporting the cartels is not a valid argument.
Okay.
So, all right. All those in favor of the amendment of moving the effective date to 2027, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay?
Nay.
So 4-1. So the motion now is OTPA.
OTP.
So the vote now is ought to pass as amended. So all those in favor of ought to pass as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? 4-1. Lou, do you want to take that out?
Sure.
Sorry. I lost my place here. Give me 1 second. So I can't find it. All right. So we're 4-1 on OTPA. Lou is going to take it out. Great. Next bill up is Senate Bill 364.
I'll move on to pass.
Been moved by Dan, ought to pass. Is there a second?
Amendment.
Yep. So seconded by Senator Rosenwald.
In addition.
It's open for discussion and further amendment. For discussion purposes, I will just say that relative to, let me pull the bill up again. 364. The appropriation language in here, under item 4 on page 2, starting on line 28. I have a problem with the appropriation just due to revenues that are coming in. We've already made a significant investment in Invest New Hampshire already in the budget cycle, and to make a huge appropriation of $15 million afterwards. So I'd make a motion to strike the appropriation on page 2, line 28.
Second that.
It's been moved by Senator Lang, second to strike the appropriation on line 28 through 32. Any further discussion?
Two things. One, Senator Innes and I had talked about striking line 6, which was the credit against the insurance tax.
Three.
And I'd like to propose that we do that as a committee amendment. But also at the public hearing, I thought there was good testimony in that there was no limit in the bill for maybe one applicant getting the entire tax credit.
Right.
And there was a suggestion that we put a cap on each individual. So maybe we could decide as a committee.
So before we get into different conversations, right now we need to just vote on whether or not we're going to strike the appropriation first, and then we'll take on the next,
Okay.
right, the follow. So right now, the motion on the table is to strike on page 2, line 28 through 32, which is a $15 million appropriation. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed.
On a 4-1, the committee amendment is adopted to strike and the bill is open to further amendment. Senator Rosenwald, I'll talk about that one individual statement. That was my question because we had
Okay.
that in other. It wasn't a recommendation by anybody. It was just, I called it up
It
as a
was a great
questionable item.
question. So one person could get the $1 million
They
tax
could.
credit.
Yeah, so CDF, in talking to the individuals, it was recommended we don't put a cap on it because it could potentially one person get the entire credit. But that also means that one person investing $15 million in the preservation of historic properties in the state of New Hampshire. So there was no benefit of forcing them. If they wanted to invest $15 million in preservation, why wouldn't we allow them to do that? Nobody came up with a really good reason. The likelihood was extremely, from CDFA, based on their other credits, the likelihood was extremely small, almost to the point of insignificant, whether that would even ever happen. And so, I chose not to bring an amendment in on that item.
Okay.
And then on the other one, you had an issue about the tax
I'd like to
credits, the
strike.
RSA 400A
Yep,
language.
line 6,
The insurance.
the insurance tax.
Yeah.
And from my conversations with Senator Ennis, I think he was in agreement.
Yes.
So it's my understanding you want to strike line 6 on page 2, but I'm assuming you also want to strike where it says RSA 400A on line 7. Because that would take the insurance tax out of all.
Yes,
Yes, that's correct.
right.
So the motion,
Insurance
if that's a motion, then the motion is to strike line 6 and the strike on line 7, RSA 400A and.
And,
Correct.
Is that your motion?
yes.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Senator Rosenwald, seconded by Senator Ennis to amend the bill further to strike line 6 on page 2 and to strike the words RSA 400A and in lines 7 and 8. Any further discussion about that amendment? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. The bill is open for further amendment. Seeing none, the motion on the floor is OTPA with the 2 committee amendments adopted, both the striking of the appropriation as well as striking of the insurance tax. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay.
Move consent.
Vote is 5-0. Senator Ennis moves consent, seconded by Senator Rosenwald. All those in favor of consent, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Senator Ennis, would you take it out?
Yes, if necessary.
Next up, I'm going to hold that one because it's probably going to be a discussion. Next up is Senate Bill 472. If you remember, Senate Bill 472 is a bill about historic horse racing and expanding out the moratorium. We passed a similar bill last year, and the House ended up merging it into another bill, which is going to be pending sometime the end of this year with us. But in order to cover my bases, I put the bill in again, and the effective date of it's the same bill that we passed already, but the date is pushed out to 2028 to give 4 years for the industry to, and the commission, more importantly, to establish what they want to do. So the bill is, I'll make a motion of OTP on Senate Bill 472. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Senator Ennis. Is there any further discussion on Senate Bill 472? Senator Murphy.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to make clear, I support almost all the bill. What's going to stop me from supporting the bill is lines 3, 4, 5. I can't get on board with a moratorium on the HHR. I can't do it. I'm a free market person, and I would like to open up the market. So
Understand. Thank you. Further discussion? No, I'm sorry. No, that was for the advanced deposit wagering, I believe. So we're okay with the bill as is. Oh, actually, hold on a second. You may be right. You may be right. I gotta look it up real quick.
I wouldn't question.
No, I wouldn't either. I generally never question Sonia on anything, but I'm pretty sure I did send a request for an amendment now that I'm thinking about it.
Right.
What's that?
It's,
Yes, all right, yeah, I'm gonna withdraw my motion and ask to hold that bill.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Didn't we talk about extending? No, sorry, different bill.
Wrong bill, that's the problem I had, yeah. So I do have an amendment into OLS to amend this bill to remove rent from being charged against charities, and I haven't got that amendment back yet. So we're gonna hold it, if you don't mind, I'll withdraw my motion, we'll hold that bill.
That's fine. I'm sure Senator Murphy doesn't care.
Next up is Senate Bill 473, relative to unclaimed horse racing tickets. As I spoke to, I'm going to make a motion of auto pass.
Second.
Seconded by Senator Ennis. And speaking of this, the fiscal analysis was confused in later on. There was a question on whether or not we only are dealing with half of it. So the fiscal note's wrong. It's 100% of the revenue that's unclaimed will end up going to the governor's scholarship fund. So, and I did have a conversation with the state treasurer, Ms. Benzapelli, I think her name is, and she was fine with this bill. So,
does this include the breakage money?
what's that? Breakage is different. So, and there's a bill we dealt with on
Right,
breakage, it's different.
Breakage is going to problem gaming.
Problem gaming.
Okay.
This is unclaimed revenue from the
This
slips.
is tickets.
Yeah. So I made a motion, Senator Ennis, OTP, Senator Ennis, second the motion. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, 5-0. It's been moved consent by Senator Ennis, seconded by Senator Rosenwald. All those in favor of consent, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Ayes have it. It'll be on consent, and I will take it out. Next up is Senate Bill 514, relative to the timber tax.
Move on to pass.
It's been moved, ought to pass by Senator Ennis, seconded by Senator Murphy. There is an amendment that was presented. Is there a motion to adopt the amendment?
So moved.
It's been moved to adopt. Give me 1 second and get the amendment number so I can read it into the record. What's the amendment number? The motion is to adopt amendment number 240117S. It's been moved by Senator Ennis, seconded by Senator Murphy to adopt the amendment. Any discussion about the amendment? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, the amendment is adopted. The bill is now auto pass as amended. Any further discussion on auto pass as amended? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, 5-0. Moved consent by Senator Ennis, seconded by Senator D'Alessandro. All those in favor of consent, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes consent. Senator Ennis, would you mind taking a note?
Of course.
Great. Next up is relative to the application of a utility property tax to certain renewable energy, Senate Bill 584. I am going to move auto pass, although I do have an amendment to discuss.
I'll second that.
It's been moved by myself, seconded by Senator Ennis. The amendment I'm going to ask to drop is the language from DRA. They asked that on line 24, we strike the words "so that the department can" and change the word "identify" to "identifying." So the whole sentence will read, as of May 1st of each year, the owners of the property exempt from the definition of utility property tax under RSA 83-F move over to the Education Trust Fund.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I would support this move, this amendment, probably for a very different reason than my colleagues, but I for once, we agree.
You agree now, Nick. Pretty often.
So all those, any further discussion about the amendment? All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Nay. 3-2, the amendment is adopted. The bill has 2 amendments now and open to further amendment. Is there any further amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of OTP with the amendments adopted by this to come before the committee? It's been moved to come out of the executive session by Senator D'Alessandro. All those in favor of coming out of executive session signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Ayes have it, and we are adjourned.
Nice.